Namaskar.
Namaskar.
On behalf of the Raza Foundation, I greet you all, our panelists, Arun, Vadehra, Dadiba Pundole, and Dinesh Vazirani, and all other friends who may be watching this show. This is the 100th year of Sayyid Raza, and we have been running an online series of talks and conversations on various aspects, whether of life, art, practice, thinking, of a great master. And today we are very lucky to have three persons who have handled Raza in a professional sense. They are the three topmost gallerists of the country who have brought contemporary and modern art to the forefront of a public attention, artistic attention. So it is very appropriate that they should also tell us as to how they had experience working with an artist like Raza. As you know, he spent 6 decades in Paris, but a substantial number of years later in his French residence, he used to visit India and show here also. So he used to love and meet his friends and things of that kind. So it was, although he was there, he was also here in that sense. So let us start by first asking each one of you, what do you recall of Raza as an artist, as a friend, as a human being in his 100th year, and 5 years after he died? So let us start with Arun Vadehra.
Thank you, Ashokji. It's very kind of you. Now, you have put it in a very simple manner, but that's a very loaded question in the sense that to talk about 26 years of association in manner of 15, 20 minutes or whatever time you gave. It's I don't know. It's emotionally very charging. It is there's a sense of nostalgia, and there is a sense of not believing that he is not anymore there. So I visited Raza in 1990, I think, for the first time. And to be honest with you and to be honest with myself, I was very, very naive in the field of art. I really did not know. The image which you see is probably my first visit. And, in his hand you have an abstract painting. And out of my innocence or my lack of knowledge towards art, I asked him, what does this painting mean? He said, "Aap matlab dhoond rahe ho?" I said, "No, sir, ma'am, I just thought that I'll just ask you, what does this painting mean?" So he said, "Mano to Shankar, na mano to Kankar." वो भी नहीं समझ में आया मेरे तो कि ये बोल के गए. तो I went back to the hotel and scratched my head. What is he trying to say? And it uh, it did. Then I figured it out whether a painting works out in his own language. That's what he used to say, or it doesn't work out. Whether it gives comfort to your retina, or it gives comfort to your intellectual or neurotic sensibilities. So thereafter, I started to go to Paris nearly every year. And my second or the third visit, I took my wife and Roshni. Roshni was very young at that time. There you can see Roshni. She must have been 15, 16. And Raza is holding a small gift for Roshni, which says love. It adorns her house's walls even today. So thereafter, there were multiple visits, and on this particular visit of mine, I bought 26 works of his at 27 lakhs. Now, in hindsight, it may look like a very small figure, 26 paintings for 27 lakhs. There were, I think, 5 or 6 paintings which were 5 by 4, or even one 6 by 4, and then the smaller ones and all that. And that was double the price I was paying Tayyar for a similar size work. But Raza Saab would calculate in francs, and rightly so. On purchase parity, it came to the figure I'm telling you. I bought it for 27 lakhs and took them to my hotel. My wife asked me, "What is this?" I said, "I bought these paintings." She said, "For how much?" I said, 27 lakhs. "You spent 27 lakhs? Just like that? Just for one afternoon, evening visit?" I said, "Look, I went by my gut feeling and I bought them. Now let's see." She asked me, "When are you going to pay him?" So I'd asked Raza for 1 year, and Raza said, "Okay, try and do it in 6 months." I paid him up in 4 months. Fortunately, I was lucky in my other business and I paid him. So that's how the journey started. And I was one of the few privileged people to visit his studio, and he would hand over a ceramic pot to me as an ashtray. According to him, I was the only person Janan would allow to smoke in his studio. So then I asked Raza, "I hope you have no problem in that." He said, "No, I have no problem." So I said, "I believe you used to smoke a lot in your younger days." He said, "I used to consume 40 to 50 cigarettes and I couldn't afford more." I said, "Thank God you couldn't afford more, otherwise you would have hit a century every day." Uh, he was, at one particular time, was a heavy smoker. The great thing about Raza was that he was, in these initial years, he was very, very flexible, very accommodating. And I would somehow ask him to please keep painting, and I'm very comfortable sitting here and just watching you paint. And watching him paint is a real treat, because even if the form is a simple triangle or a simple rectangle, they are forms within forms. As Atul Doria says that, the twist of his brush is so fantastic that it creates a form which is unique to his own language. That is Atul's quote. I told Raza that this is what Atul had to say, that paint a straight line, there's a twist in your brush. He quoted Cézanne and said that Cézanne once said that show me a straight line in nature and I'll draw it. So that's how the relationship went from strength to strength. And we would talk about not only Cézanne, but also he was very fond of Paul Klee and very fond of his book called Thinking Eye. And since Thinking Eye is all about colors, and he was a person who was a master in colors, he would orchestrate the painting in a manner a musician would orchestrate a huge orchestra. So it was extremely rewarding those first 10 to 12 years because not many gallerists were going to him and meeting him at that particular time. And I was the lucky few who did buy whatever I could, whatever I could afford. So the passion that we shared on a mutual basis was the Urdu poetry. He was very fond of reciting Urdu poetry, and also he was very fond of reciting Munshi Premchand or Kalidas or Kabir, and then shift the conversation to Tolstoy or Dostoevsky or Kafka. No, all these things I had no idea about. It's just that when he referred to all these people that I started to read and think about what he means. So that's how we went on, and as I said, the relationship went from strength to strength. And it was amazing that I spent 26 years with him, including the night before he joined the Stars. Ashokji, you would remember that
Yes.
night that when I went to the ICU, I came out and both you, me, Sonia was there, Sanjeev was there. We all had long faces that perhaps the end is around the corner. But never mind, we walked out of the hospital thinking कि सांस है तो आस है चलो देखते हैं. Next morning, of course, Ashok, you called me up to say that he's not there anymore. I still can't believe that he's not there. So, what else do I say? I asked him.
We'll come back to you. We'll come back to you, Arunji.
Oh, okay.
Let Dadiba come in.
Well, I don't know. But just thinking of it, for a brief answer to your question, to sum up 100 years, there was an incident where I visited him once. Yes. And as soon as I had sat down, he pointed towards a catalog, more like a book lying on his coffee table, which was this kind of square format, large, thick catalog of Hiroshi Sugimoto, the Japanese photographer, artist, and architect. Yes. And he said, have a look at this. And Kaushal and I were sitting side by side, and we glanced through it. And I think he was getting impatient because there was a question coming after that. So by the time we'd gone through about 30, 40 photographs, and there were a lot more, he said, what do you think of this? And I said, interesting, very unusual, because they were all photographs of the sea and the horizon meeting, and shot at different places all over the world at different times. And he says, you don't find this repetitive? And I fell into that trap. And I said, no, in fact, it's quite interesting, because even though it's a very similar frame, every image is different. And then he turned around and told me, and you're critical that my work is repetitive. And that really, I had to keep quiet and say sorry. So that's how I would sum up his 100 years.
Well, Dinesh ji?
Strangely enough, my association with Raza started a lot before I met him. I met him only in 2001. And it was actually, when I first met, it was a show that Dadiba was doing, or I think you were part of it, Dadiba. It was a show that was being done at Jahangir Art Gallery. But my association with Raza and fascination with Indian modern art itself started in 1985. This was when I was going to college from Mumbai. And there was a printer called Khurshid Punawala who gave me a poster called Jala, which was the only Indian art poster I had. It was the only thing I knew about Indian art. And that one poster from 1985 to all my years in college and all throughout my journey in the US was in my dorm room or in my room. So my association with him and fascination started long before I met him. And, I always hoped one day, of course, that I would meet him. I mean, aside from doing his retrospectives, etc., which came much later. But, I always wanted to just own one piece of Raza before even I met him. It was actually the same show at Jahangir Art Gallery where I'd gone to meet Raza, and Janine was there, and Janine was the tough one. Raza was the softer one in many ways. I think Janine kept him in good stead most of the time. And so I asked her at that time, Raza ji was there, and very gently caught my hand. And I said, look, this was I think this was in 1998 or 1999 before we started Saffron Art. And I asked Janine, can I buy this painting? And she just dismissed me completely. Raza ji took my hand and he said, you want to buy it? This painting is with Dadiba Pundole. I went to Dadiba and I pleaded him. I said, look, my whole dream in life was to buy one Raza painting. Can I buy it? And I think that association with Raza, all my memories, unfortunately, towards the end of his life, I didn't spend enough time with him. And I regret that. I feel that maybe I should have spent more time with him towards the end. But, all my journey with him that I remember is with love and affection. I think, he was a gentleman, with great emotions, and in some ways encouraged everyone around him. Not only people in the art world, but just everyone he met. And in fact, all my associations with him, right from our visits in Paris to his coming to New York, coming to London, coming to India, are just filled with great memories. And my journey in Indian modern art started with Raza. So for me, if I look back, my association with him is really very, very special. I think I'm here where I am because of Raza ji.
That's very nice. Raza was very fond of his friends, his artist friends. Ram Kumar, Bal Chhabra, Krishan Khanna, Akbar Padamsi, Tayyab Mehta, etc. Do you have, maybe Dadiba has some experience of some of them coming together, or when you were there, they sort of, because Raza was very, very concerned with and was very warm towards his friends. Sometimes I suspected his friends were not so warm as he was, but he very much liked their company, wanted to get news about them. And we have discovered in his archives, which we have now systematically organized, that there were something like thousands of letters exchanged between some of his artist friends. We have published a volume, but we are discovering more. So, Dadiba, do you have some memory?
One of my earliest memory of Raza is exactly a situation like this. It was sometime in the 1970s, and I had not yet joined the gallery. And Raza and Janine were visiting Bombay, and they'd come home to dinner. And I know that there were quite a few people there, but the only two other people I remember were Bal and Jeet, who were there at the dinner. I forget who else was there. And I was in complete awe of this man because of some of the impression that he had, had been told about by my father, and also by the fact that how people around him related to him. You could say there was something special, and he was certainly the chief guest at that dinner. And then a very interesting incident happened where he wandered around the house and suddenly called out to my father. He was in the passage and we were all in the sitting room. And my dad, that time, over the little landline telephone we had over that table, had, I think, 2 or 3 of his very early watercolors, probably of the 50s, I would guess, or 40s. No, they were definitely 40s. And in typical Raza fashion, it didn't stop at just calling my father. He wanted a whole crowd around him. And he called everyone else. Bal came. I remember I was standing there. And he told my dad, I want to buy these 3 works. And my father said, sure. I mean, you don't buy them. You can have them if you want them. And he proclaimed, no, I want to buy them and I want to tear them up. And I said, my God, what sort of a man is this, And he says, no, this is not Raza the artist. And all this work should be destroyed. Of course, later I got to understand that neither did he intend buying it, neither did he intend destroying it. But it was something that left an impression with me. I mean, how can this man want to buy it and then destroy it after that, So that's one of the early memories. And I think Bal was one of his closest friends in that sense.
Yes, Bal was
more than, later on. And I think the reason for that is because there was no professional rivalry, so to say. He wasn't really a practicing painter in that sense. And I think that kept their friendship strong. Another friendship distinctly that I was strong was Ram Kumar.
Yes.
Because I think Ram Kumar was not the sort who was in any case in competition with anyone really.
Yeah.
And they shared a very nice relationship. And I remember stories of Ram Kumar telling me about Raza because Raza was very kind to give him his studio when he went to Paris as his place to reside and to work because Ram Kumar couldn't afford to rent something. And he says Raza would do some very funny tricks. He'd have a collector of his coming to see his work and he would excuse himself and go away and leave Ram Kumar alone. And then this person would sure enough show up. And occasionally Ram Kumar made a few sales to Raza's collectors, which he said struck me later that he was intentionally doing this so that I could make a few sales. And that speaks volumes of that man. Truly speaks volumes of him.
Krishan Khanna narrates a story that when he was visiting Paris from London, he wrote a letter to Raza asking him to give him a list and addresses of his collectors. Now, normally, no artist would part with this rather confidential information. But Raza most meticulously, in his beautiful handwriting, wrote down all the names of the collectors, their coordinates, their phone numbers, etc. And Krishan says that I was so surprised that he had done it so spontaneously, so readily, without putting an eyelid. So Raza, in that sense, was very, Rajiv Dhawan,
Yes.
who laterly came to sort of some eminence. But at that time, I had never heard of him. After 2-3 visits to Paris, Raza once told me that you should go and see Rajiv Dhawan's work. So he lived not very far from where Raza lived. So I went there and saw his work and enormous amount of work and all that. And later when I came back, I discovered in Raza's own collection, there was a Rajiv Dhawan. And Rajiv Dhawan told me that, whenever I'm in difficulty, financial, and Raza comes to know about it, he either buys a work of me or sends someone from India to buy a work. Now, this is how he used to work.
But Ashok, in many ways, Raza supported young artists all through his life.
Yes.
Even to the end, he was Manish Pushkale, Akhilesh, a lot of young artists that were around him who he supported enormously. And I think that was one very incredible quality about him. That the fact that he wanted to encourage young talent, and he would never cut them down. I think he always, not only encouraged them, but like you said, he also bought their work, and he was
Yes.
hanging in his home, which is very different from most other artists, because most other artists bought their own peers. Like Krishan might have bought Hussein, he might have bought Paramsi, might have bought Ramkumar, but Raza actually bought a lot of young artists, which many other modern artists did not buy.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Uh,
That's really true. That's
uh,
really
Arun,
true.
Arun, would you
You
like?
know,
Yeah.
uh, when I used to visit his studio in 90s and early 2000, I think he gave me the liberty to go through his papers, and there were some rules in one corner, and so I would look at them, and there were some Sousa drawings, there were some Tayyab drawings, there were some Paramsi drawings, and there was one work of his which was figurative in nature, which uh, that particular work, I said, now this is the work which I'm talking about. And I asked her, can I acquire it? She said, this is a useless work, yeah? No point in your acquiring it. I said, I still want to acquire it. He said, you'll have to pay 500 euros. I said, Raza, I'll not only pay you 500 euros, I'll pay you 1,000 euros for it, but let me have it. So then he let me have it. And in addition to that, I did buy 2 drawings of Sousa, one of Padamsi, and 2 of. This is another work which I bought, which somehow he did not like it so much, but I think it is uh, so strong a work from another point of view. But and fortunately, both these works have been selected for Pompidou, and both these works were displayed at the KNMA Raza show, or the modern show, modern artist show. And so I would go through his piles of paper, which was almost like a treasure hunt for me. So I did find a lot of treasure, and he had one Tayyab canvas which was full size, 5 feet by 4 feet, and it was outstanding work of Tayyab. I asked him that can I acquire it? He said you'll have to pay equivalent of 12 lakhs for this. Tayyab at that particular time. But still, I bought it. And later on sold it for more like 24 lakhs or something. And I'm telling you, the errors one has made in omission, that I did sell it for 24 lakhs. But later on in Christie's, we sold it for 3.2 million. And so fair amount of errors of omission were made. And the beauty in Raza was that when he came to Delhi, there were just 2 Gs. One was he must visit the Gandhi Smarti, and 2 was he must meet Gaitonde. And he somehow knew that I was quite friendly to Gaitonde. He would tell me, you should take a tape recorder with you. Every time you go, you should tape whatever he has to say. I said, he hardly has anything to say. What do I record? The same thing Ramkumar told me that you should take a tape recorder. I said, he doesn't say much, what should I do? But anyway, I took the tape recorder and did record whatever he had to say. In fact, Gaitonde told me that the technique that he uses to paint. So I told Gaitonde, Guy, I'm going to go back to my office and imitate your technique and do exactly the kind of painting you do. He said, do it, I'll become your dealer. So it was amazing of Guy to say that. And of course, Tayyab and Raza got along very well. Talked about forms and formology and all that, And I remember one particular Urdu couplet which Tayyab used to recite, and Raza would 100% agree on that, was that मिल सके आसानी से उसकी ख्वाहिश किसे है, जिद तो उसकी है जो मुकद्दर में लिखा ही नहीं. So it was great, And when I once asked Raza that people must be telling you that you repeat, you keep making windows, you keep making. He said, don't you say Om, 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 or Ram, Ram, Ram. We continuously do what we love to do. So I said still, but there are a fair amount of people who say that it's a little repetitive. On that, he recited, I think, Ashokji, correct me if I'm wrong, in Munshi Premchand's, अच्छे ने अच्छा और बुरे ने बुरा जाना मुझे, अच्छे ने अच्छा और बुरे ने बुरा जाना मुझे, जिसकी जितनी जरूरत थी उतना ही पहचाना मुझे. Is it Premchand?
This is not Munshi Premchand, but anyway.
चलता है.
It holds.
But it's well said anyway.
Yes. I remember an episode, there was this Art Today gallery, and it was showing a young artist from Bhopal, Seema Ghuraiya. And at the opening, Sam was there and I had accompanied him. He went around, and after that, his eyes got fixed on a large work. He called me and he said, do you think this is worth buying? I said, surely, I think it's like that. So he went to the lady, Rekha Puri.
Yeah, Rekha Puri.
Rekha Puri. Yeah. And he said, I want to buy this. What is the price? And she quoted 1,25,000. He said, I'll give you 1,50,000. I'll give you the check right now. But you should not charge any gallery commission. You should give this to Seema Ghuraiya straight away. So he had this way and for his love of poetry, I don't think there is any other artist, at least in the modern times that I know of, not only in India but even in the world, who has used inscribed lines of poetry on his canvases. There must be at least 90 to 100 canvases using verses, and they are in Sanskrit, they are in Hindi, they are in Urdu. Interestingly, all this he did while he was living in France. He is not using any line of poetry from any French poet. He was very fond of Rilke, who was, of course, a poet in German, but he used to read Rilke in French translation. And he used to recite every morning when he will go to the studio, he would recite, he used to say something, mumble. And since I was there once and I asked कि आप ये क्या बुदबुदाते हैं, कोई मंत्र? बोले नहीं, ये तो मैं एक रिल्के की कविता याद करता हूँ. And the poem was that let me hear the voice of silence which recites in my deepest recesses of my heart, something like that. Now, Raza was a trilingual and tri-religious person. He would go to every Sunday to a church. He would go to a mosque. He'll go to a temple. When he came to Delhi, we had to arrange for his weekly visits to all these places. And he was trilingual in the sense that he would, of course, in the daily life, he used French. But whoever came from India, whatever may be his or her language, he would try to speak to him, whether or her, whether on phone or in person, in Hindi. And when the calls came from the international world, he would speak in English. So he was something remarkable. And he started naming his paintings, I think 2000 onwards. All the most of them, 90% of them are in Hindi, and many of them he would ring me up that I have done a painting and I want to give it this title. Is this the correct word that I am using? Is the spelling all right? He was very, very careful about these things. So there was a very interesting way of, and he loved company, especially people coming from India, whatever may be their intentions and whatever may be their credentials, and not all of them were always very noble. But he treated everybody with great joy and hosted if they came near lunchtime, to host a lunch, or near dinner time to take people out for dinner. And in the vicinity, Rue de Charonne, where he lived, he was treated like a prince. If he enters a restaurant, the waiters will sort of hover around him. And I understood this to mean that if there is a bill of, let's say, 60 euros, he will leave 100 euros. 40 euros being given as tips. So he was treated like a prince whenever he came and all that. And I
I can
think,
vouch for that because I went for many dinners
yeah,
on that particular road. And for me, the
Boulevard
famous,
Voltaire,
sorry,
Boulevard Voltaire.
yeah. And
Yeah.
I used to be at that particular time very fond of French
Yeah,
desserts. So I would every time say that, your French desserts are out of the world. He said, यार वो जो गरम गरम जलेबी के ऊपर मलाई डाल के खाने में मजा है वो इसमें कहाँ है मैंने कहा that is giving me stomach nervousness by just your saying it. So, and well, I was extremely uh, I got a very warm welcome in his studio, partly because somehow Janin liked me, and partly because I was one of the early visitors to his studio, and I would go through his, and then he would recite if you would do couplets, which I would try and write down in my Hindi. He also used to write down, but he would see what I've written, and he said, "के यार तुम्हें हिंदी लिखनी आती नहीं है मात्रा कहीं लगानी होती है लगाते तुम कहीं हो और हो बिंदी कहीं लगानी होती तुम लगाते कहीं और हो मैं लिख के बताता तो उस दौरान उन्होंने एक कपलेट बोला था कि इन्हीं बिखरे हुए एमाइयों में मेरे खुशियों के लक्ष्य हैं मुझे पागल ही रहने दो कि हम पागल ही अच्छे हैं
अच्छा.
तो ही said, you come in the evening, I would have written this. And he wrote that in a 12 inches by 12 inches canvas, which was properly painted, and then on black, this particular couplet emerges. And it still adorns my house. And it's, in fact, as I speak to all of you, it's right in front of me. And that, you talked about the audible. In 1998, I think, courtesy Ashok you, we had a show of Raza at the NGM.
Yes.
And he gave me a small work as a gift. Small means 8 inches by 6 inches. That's also right in front of me. And at the bottom, he has written the inaudible sound of Arun Vadehra. Full stop. Amazing.
That is not exactly inaudible sound of Arun Vadehra. You have been quite vocal on the show. Maybe we should move to Dinesh Vazirani. Would you like to comment this one?
Talking about Raza, I think the one thing that was special about him was he was a very generous man,
Yes.
and I think that's very different from a lot of other people. I remember when my first daughter was born. Like with Arun, he had presented her this beautiful little gift painting and said, "Aya ko dher sara pyar." And and when he presented it, I mean, she was 2. I mean, when he gave it to me, I was just so overwhelmed by it that he thought about it. He remembered her name, which was something that just surprised me even more. But all through, I think there were two very, very important aspects of Raza which I remember. One was his generosity, and the second was he always wanted things meticulous in many ways. And I mean, you could see his handwriting, like you mentioned. I think probably the most beautiful handwriting you'll see out of anyone, and it's just got this style, flair, grace. And I remember, visiting Raza in Paris, and he told me, "I have two really ambitions that I want to fulfill in the next 4 or 5 years." And I said, "What are those two things you want to do?" And he said, "I want to do one show in London, and I want to do my retrospective in New York." Now, and then this was 2005, 2004 when I met him, and subsequently we did his show in London in 2005, where he insisted at that time that Hussein come. He really wanted to meet Hussein that time. And I think it was the same friendship we talked about earlier. And I mean, he had affinity for lots of his friends from that time. But then he insisted that I want to do this show in New York, and I sat with him and we decided which works to pick out. And by the end, the show became so big and so complicated because it had to be absolutely perfect. These are the exact works he wanted wherever they were in the world. They had to be presented a certain way. The catalog had to look a certain way. The forward had to be a certain way. And of course, that memory of that show, I mean, I think to see Raza being so happy in New York was really heartwarming. And also to see that collection of Raza's works all through the years, which a lot of collectors had very graciously loaned for the show, was great. And I think that one memory of that opening of that show when I remember Raza's face and just that happiness when he saw this big crowd, all his friends, and this collection is that one memory I'll always have in my life.
I remember that show, Dinesh.
You remember that show?
I remember that I was in New York at that time. I remember that show.
Yeah.
And you hosted him in 4 seasons.
That's right, yeah.
And I visited him in that hotel. And I had lunch with him, for which I think you paid eventually.
Dadiba,
Yep.
would you like to butt in now?
No. The painting which Dinesh mentioned that he bought from that exhibition was a complete surprise. It was a black on black painting, with a little bit of white, and that had come by complete chance. I never really dealt with Raza. I just knew him as a friend because he was associated with Gallery Chemold. But after my dad's passing on in 1990, somehow we did build a relationship, but it was not a professional relationship as much as me paying a visit to him every time I was there, and he paying a visit to the gallery whenever he came down. And once I got this call from a client of ours saying that their friends from London were going to Paris and were very keen to meet Raza. And would I sort of fix an appointment for them? To cut a long story short, I did. And then I heard nothing more about it from Raza or from the client. Till Raza on his next visit comes with a small roll in his hand to the gallery and says, "This is for you." And I said, "What is it?" And he said, "It's a painting. It's your commission." So I said, "Commission for what?" So he said, "Don't you remember you had sent those people over? They bought some paintings from me, and I think this is the commission due to you." And Kaushal and I were completely gobsmacked because we hadn't expected anything out of it. And of course, we did do our little fuss. No, Mr. Raza, we can't accept it. I'm very sorry. But finally, yes, we did accept it. And that's the painting I sold on to Dinesh.
Oh, that's the one.
That's the
I
one.
didn't know that, Dadiba. I didn't know that.
No,
And I
he
don't
was
know if
really
any of
generous.
y'all, no, I don't know. Y'all all mentioned visits to his studio, right? But did any of y'all notice the plants in his studio?
There were plants. I don't notice them. Don't remember them. What I did notice a lot was the number of antiquities that he collected.
No.
You know,
So he had plants on his windowsill. Just
Absolutely.
on the window down, and some near
Yes.
the sofa. And can you explain why the plants near the sofa were stunted and the ones near the window sort of grew much taller?
Must have been your smoking, Dadiba.
No. You can say, most people would say it's sunlight. You know, they got more sunlight in the window. But the actual truth of the story is that every time we visited him, Raza insisted that Kaushal and I had Campari with him. Now, that's one drink that just can't go down Kaushal's throat. And she would say, "Please, Mr. Raza, I don't want it." And he would insist all the more that she had it. And then finally, he would get irritated that her drink wouldn't be refilled. And Kaushal would be forced to drink it. So she learned another technique to feed the plants. So sitting next to the sofa, she would slowly sort of keep tilting that glass, Campari and soda into the plants. And that's the reason why they stayed stunted.
I can imagine.
I think
I
you
was
told
a
me.
plant and behaved the same way. But he used to tell me at least, okay, you give up smoking. Yeah. All the other sins are fine, but you should give up smoking. Anyway, I never gave up smoking, and I'm still smoking. But he he said that live life fully, live life in a daring manner and in a passionate manner. Do whatever you feel like doing. Don't don't bother about whether it's right or wrong. So the next day, Sujata Bajaj, Raza, and I were having lunch. I think it was his 79th or 80th birthday. And somehow he said that I may not last long. So Sujata said that you'll live at least till 85. So I said I concur with her that you'll live at least till 85. So if I live till 85, I'll give each one of you a canvas, a large canvas. So Sujata said it's got to be 5 feet by 5 feet. I said, Sujata, doesn't matter. It can be 40 inches by 40 inches, it'll do. Well, I received my gift much later than his age of 85. I don't know whether Sujata has received her gift. But in case Sujata is listening to this conversation, Sujata, I can tell you that Ashokji is the custodian of his will. Maybe in the fine print it is written that he owes you a painting. Ashokji, can you check?
Ashok, you're on the spot now, by the way. There you go.
Well, since I had drafted the will as per his instruction, and it was registered by him,
So it is not there. To the
I do not
disappointment of
read
Sujata,
between the
it is not
lines. I read only the lines because the will has to be read in lines, not in between the lines.
there.
But what is amazing is this group of artists, Hussain, Akbar, Ramkumar, Krishan Khanna, Raza, Tayyab, Souza, and Gaitonde. Only Gaitonde, Souza, and Tayyab did not reach 90. The rest have all lived to be more than 90. Hussein 96 or something, Raza 95, Ramkumar 90 plus, Krishan Khanna has turned
Still
95.
going strong.
Uh,
96.
and what is it? I mean, it is an incredible group of people who came together, who went, each one of them his own way. There is no similarity, there is no common aesthetics or any shared poetics or whatever. And yet, they had such zest for living
Absolutely.
that they lived such a long life.
And
And
this
I
many
is
think
of
they
in
them,
all
spite
had
of,
very,
beg your pardon,
sorry,
go
this
ahead.
is
no,
in
I think
spite
all
of
of them
all
had
the
very
sins.
frugal beginnings. They'd all had tough beginnings. And I
Yes,
don't
yes.
think they were indulgent. So I think God gave them a few more years to indulge when they could.
Well,
I agree. This is in spite of their sins, some minor, some major, and it's sheer enthusiasm. And Raza always used to say that don't worry about these sins. If you go to heaven, well and good. If you go to hell, you'll be able to shake hands with your friends.
well, yes. So, I mean, it's. I don't think in any other field of artistic expression other than visual arts, in music or in dance or in theater or in poetry, this has happened. This is a very unique phenomena of a group of people living so long and almost working unto the last. I mean,
I
this is
agree.
something which I personally think we should celebrate in a big way. This,
Or we should all start painting now, and maybe we'll reach nicely.
well,
and, and and champagne, Arun, let's not forget.
yeah.
It gives people long lives.
Now,
Okay. Okay.
uh, as we are coming to the close of the show, uh, each one of you say the last words for the show. We have still about 10 minutes. So, Dadiba, go ahead,
Yeah.
say something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can only remember sort of anecdotes about Raza more than anything
Yeah,
else.
go ahead.
And
Very interesting.
one of the anecdotes was Raza coming to an Akbar opening, which was on a Sunday morning. And we were
Uh,
caught completely unawares because we didn't know Raza was in town. And he had just come in the previous night. And it was the afternoon, and most people were having a beer or a vodka. And I asked Mr. Raza, what can I get you to drink? And he said, might you have some whiskey? Uh, so we weren't serving whiskey, but we did have whiskey in the gallery. And I said, sure, I'll get you one. So he said, come, let me help you. I said, no, please don't bother. I can get it. No, let me come with you. And I poured him a whiskey, and he said, make it a little strong one. So I poured a strong whiskey, and he said, more and more and more till about half the glass was full. And then he topped it up with some water and turned round. And then he tells me, my doctor in France has told me now to have only one drink. So it was like 4 drinks poured in one, but my doctor has told me only to have one drink. So I've also learned all the wrong things from him, how to get out of these tricky situations.
I had a similar experience, Dadiba, in his studio. He would normally towards the evening would say, हो जाए, बहुत बोलते थे, हो जाए. So, मैंने कहा, "जी, हो जाए." So he put 2 glasses and he put a bottle of whiskey and he said that, Arun, I only have one drink. I said, fine. So he poured himself 3/4 of a glass full of whiskey. And he says, this is the first drink and the last drink. I said, I'll have 3 to 4 drinks. You can have one only.
I think by 2007 that had changed. The switch to champagne. We had to place a bottle of champagne in his room at the Four Seasons in New York, every day, and he really enjoyed calling people there to have that drink. So that one glass changed to maybe a bottle by that time. But
Yeah.
the one thing I will say is that really cheers to Raza. I mean, I think what he's created and number of people he's inspired, and what he's given us is really incredible. And my memories of him are always going to be special in many, many ways. I mean, the reason why I'm here, like I said in the beginning, is because of Raza.
Though I think a lot of that credit should go to Ashok Vajpeyi, because you were one of his true friends who was sort of relatively honest with him. I found a lot of us, me included, tending to be sort of very flattering towards him and not necessarily telling him the truth. Whilst I noticed in my few interactions where both of you all were together that you didn't sort of push your point of view, but you were one person who told him what you genuinely felt of any question put to you.
Well, one of the, I met him for the first time. I invited him to Bhopal in 1979. The state to which he belonged invited him for the first time. And he came all the way from Paris, and he held the first ever exhibition of Raza's works in his home state, in Bhopal. And somehow, because he loved poetry, and I happened to be a poet, so we struck. And finally, it is so exhilarating to do a lot of things in the Raza Foundation to keep his vision alive. And I think he deserves. He never allowed us to
be done. I'm sure it will be done.
He never allowed us to do anything in his name while he was alive by the Raza Foundation. He said, I am a trustee and I cannot allow anything of the trust to be used for my personal purposes. So even though we published some books, but they were published by Arun Vadehra, although we prepared the whole material. So he was ethically also very, very...
Absolutely.
And this is what... So thank you very much. It was very interesting.
Thank you, Ashok.
Thank you, Ashok.
Thank you, Dinesh.
Not at all. Thank you all.
And good to see you, Dadiba. Good to see you, Dinesh. If not in person, in an image, it's pretty good. Thank you, Ashok. Thank you so much.
And Raza is going to come to haunt all of us today for what we've said. For anyone who said anything wrong, be careful.
Thank you.